Well, hello, kindred spirits. How are y'all doing today? I hope that everyone is doing great and you are safe from this storm that's rolling in. If you live on the East Coast, it is getting ready to come a big one out there, and so it's kind of cooled off a little bit. The wind's blowing and we're getting ready to have a big gully washer. So I wanted to get this video in before we lose power and let you know that I'm thinking about you. And I saw all of your comments last week on the candle making video, and I'll make you a longer video. That was kind of an experiment, sort of a storytelling experiment, and I'll make you a longer video next time so you can know what I do to make candles. Now, I am by no means a candle making expert. I would recommend that you go to candlescience.com and learn from them. They are the experts. They are from Raleigh, and so I can order from them today and then get my package tomorrow. But they are a wealth of information, great information. So they are the experts, but I heard you, and so I will definitely make another video on candle making and just show you my process and slow it down just a little bit. But today I thought it would be a lot of fun to just talk to you a little bit about some of the things that I've been doing, and then read to you from some cookbooks that have been instrumental in my philosophy on health, and just show you again a few things that I've been doing. So back when I first started having children around 1999, the low-fat craze started coming into play. And so everything that was on the grocery store shelves in the center aisle seemed to be focused on low fat this and low fat that. Everything was low fat. And even though I didn't know a lot at all about nutrition, I knew enough that I didn't think that taking out all the fat, the good fats, was a good thing. So, heavy cream and half and whipped cream and butter seemed to kind of become the bad guy. And it was replaced with a lot more flours and a lot more sugars. And so that never set right with me. And so I started doing a little bit of research, and I came across several different books that were very, very helpful in me learning about nutrition and then learning about how to better feed myself and my family as well. And so one of those books is called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon, and it's with Mary G. Enig, PhD. This is the best book. It is thick. And it says the cookbook that challenges politically correct nutrition and the diet dictocrats. And so the premise of this book is that you can eat meat, potatoes, vegetables, eggs, cream, things like that, as long as it's a whole food and not a processed packaged food. And she has a lot of science to back up her statements in here. She does have a lot of evidence-based information in here. And so one of the things that I learned early on from Sally Fallon was how to ferment vegetables and to make vegetables that are easy to digest, but also are full of probiotics that will aid in digestion and also just keep your gut healthy, because your gut is so very important. And you may remember I did that video, a month ago about, it was a skincare tips video, and I was talking to you about apple cider vinegar being important for your gut health, because if your gut isn't healthy, then your skin's not going to be healthy, and then you're also going to have brain fog as well. It's fascinating information, absolutely fascinating. But anyway, so I learned from Sally Fallon how to make lacto fermented vegetables. And what you do is you mix together whey, you make your own whey, and then you mix salt and water, and then you put it in the vegetables, and then you let those vegetables sit out on the counter for 3 days if it's in a warm area, and you'll see things start bubbling because the yeast from the air are going to get into those ferments that you're making, and it's going to start working, and you're going to create a powerhouse of a fermented probiotic substance to eat. And so right now in the kitchen I have several different things going on. I have some lacto fermented cucumbers, carrots, and sauerkraut. I've got a big old crock of sauerkraut going, and when I lifted the lid off of it this morning, I noticed that it was bubbling. So I'm really excited about eating that, because I don't know if any of y'all like sauerkraut or not. Traditional like kraut from a can, or even kraut that is in a bag cold in the store, is wonderful. It tastes great, but when you make it yourself, you can eat it sooner. You don't have to wait, because what you get at the grocery store has been fermented for quite some time. But this resembles a fresher cabbage, and the taste is so good. Oh my word, it is so good. The very first time I ever had fermented cabbage like that was in Germany, and we had a traditional German meal. Goodness, what is that called? Schnitzel. We had schnitzel, pork schnitzel, and we had some potatoes and some apples, and then we had some fermented cabbage, and they called it sauerkraut, but it was not like our sauerkraut here in the U.S. It was a lighter version, and what I was eating looked like fresher cabbage. All that to say, that taste was so good, and I loved it. And so when I learned how to make that at home, my kids were crazy about it. And that surprised me, because most kids won't touch sauerkraut, but they liked that. And then they loved those little lacto fermented carrots, because it was fun, because the carrots, when they're made in this method, they almost have an effervescent taste. It's almost like the carrots have been put in a seltzer water, but it's different. It's effervescent like seltzer water, if that makes sense. And they're so tasty and so good for you too. So if any of you are interested in cooking, and some of the things just don't sit right with you regarding some of the dietary guidelines, then I would suggest that you get this book, because it has been a wealth of information to me, and you learn how to cook from it, but you also learn not only how to cook, but nourish your body at the same time, and that's so very important. So that is one of my recommendations. And then another book that I have learned so much from over the years is a book by a lady named Sue Gregg, and this is whole grain versatility. I can't talk today. And she explains about the importance of using whole grains in your diet. Now, let me explain this a little bit. So y'all sit back, because I got a big old bunch of stuff to tell you about this. So many of us have had to go gluten-free because of gut issues, health issues. And this book was written long before a lot of the gluten-free things were so prevalent like they are today. And they talk about milling your own wheat berries and then using those freshly ground wheat berries into homemade breads, and how it does make a difference in your health when you do that, because so much of the nutrient value is gone when you just use traditional flour that's already in a sack, or from commercially baked goods, because they're also using flours that have been adulterated. And so let me read a little bit about that to you. This says, whatever happened to whole grain? For centuries, the bread of peasants in Europe was a coarse, dark, and heavy loaf made of perhaps a little wheat and a quantity of rye or barley oats and oats. For example, from the time of Charlemagne, a bread even as hard as trencher bread was common in the European household. Trencher came from a French word referring to a wooden plate. This coarse, square cut flatbread was so hard it served as the plate shared between two people on which they placed their food. It is little wonder that civilizations have attempted to produce breads more appealing in texture and color. Little progress was made in these attempts until the 19th century. Fine flour was expensive and thus limited to use by the wealthy before then. All this changed, however, when Governor Washburn of Minnesota tasted his first white French roll at an exhibition in Paris in 1876. Washburn returned to America and introduced the steel roller mill, an economical method of making white flour available. This flour stored well, traveled across the pioneer miles well, and baked into nice, high, light loaves of pleasant textured bread. What defined status for the wealthy now became accessible to all. Homemakers were thrilled, and no one was the wiser for its nutritional bankruptcy. When the Depression hit in the 1930s, people relied more on inexpensive foods, including white bread. This resulted in a rampant spread of the B1 deficiency disease, beriberi. There was just not enough sustaining nutrients in white bread. Enrichment was thus introduced and added 3 synthetic B vitamins and iron to white flour. But the full nutritional value of over 30 nutrients was not restored, nor was fiber loss even considered. Enriched white flour products of all kinds have not only become entrenched in our society, but have rapidly spread throughout the world. The desire for convenience, ready availability, and familiarity of taste and preparation far outweigh awareness and concern for nutritional value, even for those who believe in God's magnificent wisdom. It is a tragedy that we have been kept in such ignorance about whole grain wonders. I want you to appreciate nutritional riches of whole grains. With tasty recipes, you can be liberated from dependence on nutrient and fiber depleted wheat flour. So then it goes on to give a little history of fiber. And it's talking about the grain mills and how it was still unknown when the grain mills came into production and were making more white flour here in the U.S. And then it goes on into the 70s and 80s and 90s about how many diseases have become rampant in our daily lives. And so she also talks about soaking whole grains. And I'm going to show y'all a recipe in just a few minutes that I've been making that is so good. It's for a soaked bread recipe. It's called a No Knead bread recipe. But it talks about maximizing whole grain nutritional benefits. And it says a major concern about fiber relates to phytates or phytic acid content. It is well documented that the phytates in high fiber foods bind a certain portion of protein, fat, vitamins, and minerals as calcium, phosphorus, iron, and zinc, preventing them from being absorbed by the body. This is especially true of calcium content of whole grain, which is 4 times that of white flour. Yet the phytates inhibit calcium's absorption, which promotes an imbalance in the calcium-phosphorus ratio. The nutrient binding effects of phytates can be minimized or eliminated by soaking the whole grain. Soaking, sprouting, or fermenting the grain or flour activates the grain enzymes to pre-digest the nutrient components of the grain to make them more available to the body. This is a similar action as takes place when making sourdough. And so she has so many different this book is so good. I don't even know if it's still in print or not. I know that she went on to rewrite her books. She revised them because they were written in the early 80s, and so she updated them years ago. So you probably could find these. She has one about snacks and lunches and healthy dinners and main dishes, and they were just a sweet little wealth of information for me when my kids were growing up, and I used them a lot. And so after reading these books, Sue Becker's books, and learning about whole wheat and how much more nutritionally superior it is if you do grind your own wheat berries, I bought a grain mill and I bought some wheat berries and started grinding my own wheat and baking bread. And I have to tell you, I failed so many times. Oh my gosh. Well, let me say this too. Whole grain bread is a very different animal than store-bought whole grain bread. So what I was baking probably was okay. It's a much more dense loaf. It's not light and fluffy like what we're used to. And there was a learning curve because it didn't all turn out right. But over time, it got better and better, and I learned how to make it better. And one thing that I did to make it a lot better is I bought a Bosch kitchen mixer, and I've got a bread recipe on my YouTube channel in which I show you how I use that. That was a game changer because the whole wheat needs to be kneaded a lot in order for those proteins, the gluten proteins, to form and to make it a stretchier bread, and then therefore making it rise higher. And I wasn't working it hard enough when I was kneading it by hand. And so when I got that grain mixer or the bread mixer, it worked it much better, and it was a much better bread. But I'm going to show you what I've been doing and this bread recipe that I have, and it's for a soaked grain bread. And my daughter said that she thought it would be fun to eat that bread in front of a cozy fire and eating a hearty stew out of a wooden bowl because it felt ancient. It felt and tasted ancient, that bread did. And that's a good thing, and because it felt so hearty and it felt like you were a Viking or something as you were eating it. And so I know we all have big imaginations around here, but anyway, it's worth giving it a try. And so let me tell you also about this lady. This is Sue Becker, and she has a business down in Georgia called Bread Beckers, and you can look at her website and see all the things that she has for sale and all of the information that she has about whole grain breads too. Now, I am not affiliated with any of these folks. They've just been mentors to me, and they didn't even know they were my mentors for 20 plus years. But if you're interested in things like this, I'll leave links to their websites so you can go check them out if you're not familiar with them, because they do offer a wealth of information that might be beneficial to you. Now, I do have to say too, it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work, and I got away from this for the past 2 years because, I went back to school and I just got busy with my business, and it's a lot of work to do all this stuff. But now that things have settled down a bit and I'm able to devote more time, I'm getting back into it full steam because it is so important to nourish our bodies with home cooked foods. As a matter of fact, I am teaching a class on Sunday down at our little farmhouse, and it's a class about home economics, living on one income, and I'm going to teach about, how to live on one income, first of all, if you are a parent who wants to stay at home, and some of the frugal things you can do. And then also I teach about hospitality, how you can be hospitable still on a limited income, because you don't have to serve fancy foods. A lot of times it's just in the presentation and the love that you have behind it. So you can invite somebody over to share a meal with you, and it can be beans, and rice. But if you present it in a loving way, and then you maybe bring out some pretty plates and have a pretty presentation along with it, that meal that seems like a peasant's meal can be a meal fit for a king. And so I like to teach people things like that. So anyway, I am teaching a class on that. But all that to say, the reason I even brought that up is because because I know that my audience is predominantly female. It's about 75% female, and your ages are 24 to 36 according to YouTube. And so knowing that, I know that you ladies, a lot of you may be mothers right now. And so and you may have young children at home. And so if you cook from scratch instead of buying convenience meals, you're going to have two things going for you. First of all, it's going to save you a lot more money. And then second of all, it's going to be so much better for the health of your family. And that will also save you money in the long run, because you may not have to make so many trips to the doctor if you are feeding your family a steady diet of healthy foods that are super nutritious as well. So let me read a little piece from Sue Becker's book too, and let's see. This says, prior to the 1900s, most flour was milled locally and the bread baked at home. Since the flour could not be stored, only enough grain was ground fresh each day to meet the needs of the community. This meant that just about every family was gathering their daily manna. However, in the 1920s, new technology allowed enterprising millers to separate the wheat components. By removing the germ oil, and the bran, the remaining white flour could be stored indefinitely. This began to eliminate the need for local milling, and people began to relinquish their own responsibility of preparing their bread daily. Lucrative markets were also found for the nutritious byproducts of this new milling process. The bran and wheat germ were sold as high-protein food supplements for cattle. Local mills soon went out of business as the large roller mills produced huge volumes of long-lasting white flour. And it says this appeared to be a great advance in technology. In just a short time, however, cases of beriberi, we saw that earlier, and pellagra began to drastically increase. Both of these diseases are the result of vitamin B deficiencies, and health officials trace the problem to the new white flour. The new milling process strips the B vitamins as well as about 24 other nutrients from the wheat kernels. So that's something to consider, because with the advance of technology and convenience, it's a beautiful thing, because again, like I said, it is not easy to purposefully get out your grain mill, grind wheat, make your bread, bake it, and then eat it every day, or every other day, even if you don't do it every day. But it does make a difference in the long run in your health. And sometimes to have good health, you have to do things that are a little bit harder and less convenient and less easy for you. So with that, I'm going to show you one last thing that I've been doing too, because it's so fun to create things. And I have, well, let me show you the video. A few videos back, I took y'all over to a farm in Mount Pleasant, North Carolina called Porter Farms. And I buy a lot of my beef and my raw milk from them. And I also bought beef fat about a month ago, and it was frozen, and I wanted to make my own tallow. And you can see this is the rendered tallow that I made yesterday out of all that beef fat. And my plan is to make soap and beauty cream out of some of it, and then I'm going to use the rest of it for cooking. I've already asked my boys if they wanted some, and they definitely do. And then they have another friend who wants some as well. So I'm going to put some of it in jars and give it to them to cook with. You would use this like you would use bacon fat. You could fry your eggs with it. And or if a recipe calls for a little bit of oil, you could use this in the place of that. You could melt it down and use it as oil. But you can see here that I'm cutting it up because I'm going to render some of it further. And what that means is I'm going to cook it down with a mixture of water and salt. And it's going to take away some of the extra little bits of meat that may still be left in there. There wasn't that much at all, but if I'm going to use part of it to make soap, I want it all to be very clean. And so I just want to get rid of the rest of those little pieces. But you can see here, isn't that beautiful? It came out so pretty, and I rendered it down in my oven yesterday, and it was an easy process. So I'm very excited to start using this in my cooking. I've never used tallow before. Now this is my bread that I've soaked overnight. So what I did was I took 6 cups of freshly ground wheat flour and I put it into a big bowl, and to that I added 1 cup of buttermilk and then 4 more cups of water, and I mixed all of that together, put a towel over it, and then let it soak overnight. And so I'm getting ready to bake my bread here in just a few minutes. And so what I do to prepare it for baking is I add salt, a little bit of yeast, and some sorghum. You can add honey or you can add maple syrup, but I just prefer the flavor of sorghum. It's a deeper, heartier flavor, and I find that my family likes that best too. And so I'm adding 2.5 teaspoons of yeast to some warm water. And this is going to help this bread rise. This is not a sourdough recipe. And I've got 1/2 cup of water sitting there. And I usually buy my yeast in bulk. It's just cheaper that way, and I store it in a little mason jar with a lid. And then it also calls for 2.25, maybe 2.5 teaspoons of salt, and I'm using a Himalayan sea salt. And I'm just putting that in to that water and yeast mixture as well. And then lastly, I'm adding 2.5 tablespoons of sorghum. Probably a little more because it's hard to pour sorghum from a mason jar into that skinny little measuring spoon there, but we'll get it done. I love the taste of sorghum. Do y'all know what that is? And have you ever had it? It is so good. And so I'm mixing that all together really well. And then I'm going to pour that entire mixture. Over into my bowl of soaked grains. I'm going to work on trying to get every little bit of that down in there. And keep in mind again that this bread is very different than traditional wheat bread because it is a denser loaf. It has a very different feel and texture and taste, but it is so very good. This recipe, by the way, came from Miss Mary, the wonderful Miss Mary over at Mary's Nest. If you haven't watched any of her videos, you got to go find her. She is a walking library of information about food and does such a spectacular job. She is a born teacher. I just love her. So again, you're just going to stir real good, get all of that water mixture incorporated there, your water and sorghum mixture mixed in. You may have to add a little bit more flour too, just to make it to where the water's not sitting on top of this. And this is going to be a recipe that you're going to have to make several times because it's a recipe that you learn by feel and learn by doing. But we took a couple of slices of this bread and some apples and oranges over to the Whitewater Center last week. My son Wesley and I went down to the Whitewater Center in Charlotte, and we rode the Whitewater Rapids and floated down the river, the Catawba River, in a canoe. It was so much fun, but we didn't want to buy food while we were there at the restaurants, so we brought our own. And we both commented on how great we felt after we ate our little snack of bread and apples from the mountains and oranges, and we were ready to go at it again, afterwards, because we felt good and nourished instead of food hungover. In the next part of the video, you can see that my bread has been mixed up well, and I let it sit for 45 minutes and just rest and rise a little bit. And it's got a nice sticky texture. Again, this soaked dough bread is very different than regular kneaded dough bread, and so it is slightly stickier. I melted some of that rendered tallow, beef tallow, and I'm using that to grease my pans instead of traditional olive oil or Wesson oil to grease the pans. I thought it would taste better if I used some of that tallow. And so I'm just coating the bottoms and sides of my baking pans with that tallow, making sure I get it all over all the nooks and crannies so that my bread won't stick. And after the pans have all been well oiled, I'm going to split the dough into each of the pans, and this is a little bit hard to work with. I had to break it off with my fingers there. But I'm splitting it into each pan, and I'm going to let this rise for another 30 minutes. Now it is time to bake the bread. Who will help me bake the bread? Said the little red hen. I'm baking it at 350 for 45 minutes, and I have taken my loaves out. They are a beautiful golden brown. As you can see, it is a denser loaf, very chewy, but very delicious. Thank you so much, friends, for watching today, and I can't wait to see you on the next video. Bye-bye.